everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited about kicking off our Fearless Conversation series and today's conversation. So to get us started and tell us a little bit about the Fearless Conversation series, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Craig Welfel, who is a professor of British American and post-colonial literature here at Flagler College.
Thank you, Sandra. Flagler is taking up these conversations as a campus in partnership with our community because our core values compel us to find ways to transform these difficult issues that threaten to divide us into opportunities to build understanding and to model productive dialogue across differences. And I know it sounds a little bit dramatic, but we feel like what's at risk if we don't is nothing less than our existence as a community itself. The issues that we're facing are not new issues. Indeed, some of them are appallingly old. But there's a new urgency to take them up, and simultaneous with that, there is, it seems, a lack of faith in our capacity to grapple with them together. And if we lose that capacity to talk with one another, we don't just lose the dialogue between us, we lose us. We lose the community that we make through that dialogue. So here we are, and we have difficult work to do. To paraphrase Mr. Rogers, we have to talk about the difficult stuff because the difficult stuff is part of what it means to be human. And when those parts of human experience become mentionable, they become manageable. The question, of course, is how to make them manageable. And one way forward, we feel, is reflected in the obligations that frame these conversations as an idea, which are also the bedrock of democratic and civic engagement. Among those obligations, I want to be clear, is not that we're all supposed to agree with each other or that we need to think the same things. Education is not to teach us what to think. It's to give us the tools and the information to do the work of thought. And in that context, a diversity of opinion is what makes us strongest. So we want to represent a variety of viewpoints, and it turns out there are actually more than two sides of things. But we also have to demand that those viewpoints are represented in a good faith and productive manner. So not talking points or political slogans or straw men, but reasoned and evidenced arguments, not simplifications, but diving into nuances and contexts and complexities. And we have to seek out expertise to guide us. We have to sift fact from opinion and truth from error. On the flip side, a conversation means that we have to listen and listen generously. We should seek to empathize and understand, and we should come ready to learn about the impacts of our ideas and our practices on people beyond our own personal experience. That's the point. And keep in mind as you listen that we're here to discuss ideas, which are separate from who people are. People are complex. They're not defined by any single idea. And ideas, especially when they're difficult, often come out wrong. Most importantly, remember that people can change their ideas, and that is in fact the goal, even if it's the hardest goal, of dialogue and of critical thinking. Critical thinking is an education buzzword. And like a lot of buzzwords, it covers over a lot of BS, and it can get really hard to define really quickly. But the best definition I've ever heard of critical thinking has all of the cutting simplicity of a truth. It's a question. When was the last time that you thought about something or talked with someone about something that you really cared about and changed your mind? Not their mind, but your mind. And I think that the answer for most of us is probably that it's been a long time. But that's a sad thing. It's perhaps the end of something more valuable than we realize. It's the end of a certain kind of freedom. The freedom to choose what you think and believe is the essence of an education. And tonight we're here to begin to think about these issues and questions from different points of view and about their consequences for all of us so that we can have the freedom to choose what to do about it. And that's not just an educational obligation, it's an ethical one and perhaps even a spiritual one. So let's let that define our community and begin our work today. And this is, of course, only beginning. It's not a final conversation, it's a conversation here, hopefully so that there can be lots more conversations out there. So welcome to Fearless Conversations. And welcome to our moderator again, Sandra.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very, very well said. Thank you so much. So to introduce our conversation today, the title we settled on is Police and Social Justice, a complex conversation about a complex calling. The collective outrage over the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others affected all Americans in some way. Some have called for defunding the police altogether, while others have a strong desire for law and order at any cost. Because of this, law enforcement and social justice in America has been thrust into the national spotlight. We're excited to have our panelists here, and we're excited that you've decided to join them as they discuss the nuanced and complex topics of defunding the police, police militarization, body cameras, and much more. Whatever your own opinions on law enforcement and social justice, this conversation promises to be honest, eye-opening, an honest and eye-opening discussion for our community. And I do want to clarify that we are engaging in dialogue, not debate. Debate is point counterpoint, whereas dialogue, as Craig said earlier, is more about engaging in conversations and hearing ideas. So with that, I'm really excited. I will go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then our panelists will have an opportunity to share 2 to 3 minutes of their perspectives on this topic. So quickly, I'll say that we have with us Mr. Rob Hardwick, who is the Chief of St. Augustine Beach Police. And am I allowed to say Sheriff-elect? Am I not allowed to say that? Okay, pretend like I didn't say it. Dr. Joshua Beal, Criminology Program Director. We have our student panelist, Mr. Colby Spiros, and our community member, Karen Goldman, who is the Executive Director of Compassionate St. Augustine. For a little housekeeping before we get started, we will have time at the end of the conversation for questions from our attendees. So be sure to submit your questions through the chat box in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Also, we deeply regret that unfortunately we were not able to secure a sign language interpreter for this event. While we recognize that it will not be the exact experience, we will have the video available after the event with captions. So with that, I will give our panelists an opportunity for a brief 2 to 3 minute opening statement on their philosophy of law enforcement, specifically on how it deals with racial issues. So we can go in the same order of the introductions, starting with Chief Hardwick.
Dr. Miles, thank you. Dr. Beal, Kobe, and Karen, and Flagler College alumni and students, thank you for having me on tonight. I think this issue is so important, and I hate the fact that we have to do it via Zoom. I think it's more important that we do it together as a community. However, we'll make it work with this being said. So as a Flagler College alumni, myself, my wife, and my youngest son, this is truly a privilege to be on here. So thank you very much for having me. You know, I will tell you this, you know, to ask me about my philosophy of law enforcement, especially when it deals with racial issues, is a difficult conversations. I am a very unique chief of police, and you can say sheriff-elect. I have the general election coming up in November 3rd, and I'll be a new sheriff in January. With that being said, that's a position I can affect change among the entire county. Some things I got to say about me, which is so important to the philosophy of, especially when it deals with racial issues, is I am a coach of a predominantly, well, I'll say it's a mixed school in St. Johns County, southern St. Johns County. And I do that for 2 reasons, by the way. I don't do it because I'm the best coach. I do it because I want those relationships with our community of all race, creed, color, and sexual orientation. I will tell you this, we have some uphill battle ahead of us. But you on this panel tonight is the reason why we can make change, because you want to speak up, you want to make a difference, and you want to be a part of change. I will tell you this, in law enforcement, you know, we have become the catch-all. We have become the clinical social workers that we're not trained to do. We've become the social worker under trial and fire. With that being said, you know, we do the best job that we can out there based on the resources we have and based on the support we have and based on the things that we learn from good practices and, of course, our best practices. So that being said, I'm super excited about being here tonight. It's an honor. It's a privilege to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about all these issues that you brought up, Dr. Miles. And thank you for heading this up, Flagler College, and looking forward to speaking on the topics.
Thank you. Dr. Beal?
Thanks, Dr. Miles. And I also want to say thanks to Chief Hardwick and all the other panelists for being here. I'm very much looking forward to this. From an academic perspective, right, I want to make it very, very clear right out of the gate. I've never been in law enforcement. I've gotten pulled over by law enforcement. But otherwise, my interaction with law enforcement are fairly limited. And also, I approach this from very much an academic perspective versus an applied perspective, like Chief Hardwick has. And so in our academic communities and in law enforcement communities, I guess my perspective on this is community-oriented policing is the way that seems to be the empirically the best way to approach law enforcement. And community-oriented policing has a tremendous reliance on law enforcement working with the community. Law enforcement doesn't have a crystal ball to know where bad things are happening and to show up there. They require the community to call in for help, but it also requires, right, law enforcement to go out and be in the community, working with communities, and not solely being the individuals that are interacting with the community in negative interactions. Ironically, community-oriented policing empirically has shown to reduce crime. It's shown to reduce fear of crime, which increases community trust, not only with law enforcement, but with neighbors, and shown to increase quality of life for the individuals that are living in neighborhoods and areas where community-oriented policing is practiced. And so from a strictly empirical academic perspective, that to me is kind of the best way to bridge some of these gaps between communities that are feeling disadvantaged and in some cases are being targeted by law enforcement in some capacity.
Thank you. Spiros?
Thank you, Dr. Miles. My philosophy of law enforcement is made up of what I've learned in my studies and also how close I am due to my background as a son of an officer, as well as someone who wants to get into the field. And though those two aspects are sometimes contradictory, I believe they can be complementary because I've learned in my studies that historically it has proved to be a tool that has been used to oppress some groups, whether it be slave patrols in the South or Native American constables in New England back like the 1800s. Fortunately, as a society, we've moved away from normalizing that kind of behavior. We still have a ways to go. And I think that the goal of modern law enforcement is to do as it says, protect and serve. And though, we do need someone to enforce the law and maintain order, the question of who is policed and how they are policed has been problematic. Things like the war on drugs in particular have been contributors to this concept of police militarization and the impacts of that initiative. They've definitely proven to be more detrimental than helpful. I am personally privileged because I've never had any bad interactions with Leos, even if the situation I'm meeting them in is less than pleasant. So from what I've seen in my own life and knowing who my dad was and what he stood for, the badge represents a position of authority that should always stand for justice and the betterment of the community. And I believe that police should be arbiters of the community and not tools of oppression for the same reasons that Dr. Beal listed for community policing as being a more effective model.
Thank you. And Karen Goldman.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel as a representative of Compassionate St. Augustine. I'm the executive director and founder of that nonprofit organization. And I truly, with respect to what Joshua had to say, I'm probably the only person on this panel who does not have an academic or on-the-job background in the areas that we're talking about. However, professionally, over the last 25 years, I've served as a bridge builder conflict resolution consultant that uses systems theory to de-escalate conflict and affect cultural and practical transformation in churches and nonprofits of all sizes, as well as in our community, where we have brought peaceful resolution to very highly volatile situations. And additionally, CSA, Compassionate St. Augustine, does have hands-on experience working indirectly and directly with our local and state criminal justice system. For example, for the last 6 years, CSA has had a thriving criminal in action, compassion in action, criminal justice and prison reform initiative that has influenced and brought about awareness and notable systemic change concerning related policies and issues in our community, our county, and beyond. Some of you I know are familiar with what we've done, for example, at St. John's Youth Academy, which is a level 8 secure residential Department of Juvenile Justice facility for 72 teenage boys on Avenue D in St. Augustine behind the county jail. The other has been our successful effort to spearhead and guide to fruition, along with St. Paul AME Church and the city of St. Augustine, and a growing number of partnerships, including Flagler College, to bring the acclaimed Operation New Hope Ready for Work program. And that's anti-recidivism, one of the most successful in the country, and job preparedness for the formerly incarcerated people from St. Johns County. And since March, it was a 2-year effort to bring it here. And since March, it's been serving clients at its Washington Street office and placing graduates in local above minimum wage jobs. And so, like I said, our approach, and to plug into what you were talking about, the racism issue, is to be hands-on in the community and direct efforts that bring social justice to all people, no matter who they are, and do it in a way that's peaceful, civil, and most of all, compassionate. Our mission is to inspire, influence, and grow a culture of compassion through advocacy, awareness, and action. And it is the underpinning of all we have done over the last 10 years in both thought, word, and deed. So tonight, that mission will be kind of a guiding light, if you will, to me, and as the representative of Compassionate St. Augustine, our understanding of and reactions and responses to these complex, multifaceted issues that are on the table tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So for our first question, Dr. Beal, I'm going to throw you a softball just to get us started. Could you give a brief overview of the Defund the Police movement?
So the Defund the Police movement largely started actually fairly recently. There have been some calls throughout history, but it hasn't really picked up steam too much until kind of this year. And before we even dive into the movement, I do want to say one of the things that kind of we tended in social science in general see is we come up with these fun, catchy phrases like defund the police or police militarization, and then we end up getting bogged down in the inaccuracy of the phrases. And obviously a lot of these ideas, and it's unfortunate that we do, because it keeps us from debating the real concepts that we're talking about when we get bogged down with the mottos. But obviously with all these issues, it kind of is a spectrum on which people kind of view these issues. On an extreme end of the spectrum, I'm not saying this is necessarily an extreme view, but on the extreme end of a spectrum, there's pushes for potentially complete elimination of the police as a agency, with kind of like what Spiros hinted at, with the fact that police have been used in the past as slave patrols. There's kind of this institutionalized idea that there is racism embedded in the institution, and so the only way to really solve the institution is to destroy the institution and rebuild something that doesn't have these kind of roots to it. A kind of more middle of the road idea of defunding the police, which is also something that Chief Hardwick has mentioned, is this idea that law enforcement has become this kind of catch-all thing for us. We see law enforcement acting as social workers. We have law enforcement in our schools now that are there to obviously try and help prevent school shootings, but then in practice what ends up happening is administrators at schools would use the sheriff's deputies to kind of be a pseudo guidance counselor or enforcer of the rules that really should be handled by deans or assistant principals in a school setting. And so the kind of middle of the road idea of defunding the police is a little bit more focused on the idea of why not have first responders that are mental health first responders? Why not have, kind of like we have medical first responders, why not have some of these other first responders that could help deal with other issues that we don't need to necessarily force on law enforcement? Of course, moving further down along the spectrum, the problems that people would argue that happen with that is if a store called and said, hey, there's somebody acting crazy here, and a first responder comes that's trained in mental health issues and mental health de-escalation, and the person is crazy but also very violent, we're just delaying law enforcement response time. And so as we move down the spectrum, people say, well, we kind of need law enforcement to be the ones that respond to these situations because we never know if a person is armed. We don't know if a person has some sort of violent history or past that they're going to then express in these situations. And so that's kind of a broad academic overview of the varying perspectives of defunding the police. And of course, I'm a college professor. I could talk about this for 6 or 7 hours, but I've been limited to, 2 or 3 minutes to discuss it. So that's the quick and dirty of the defund the police movement.
Yes, and I will kick you out of here if you talk for 6 hours. And so I'll move on to my next question. And Chief Hardwick, I'll ask it of you first. But after Chief Hardwick has a chance to answer, if anyone else on the panel would like to respond, feel free. So I actually didn't give any background for myself in terms of my connection to the topic. And I have actually worked with training police departments in a previous role that I served in when I lived in Indiana. And I used to go to trainings on how to work I also used to work with students with disabilities. And so I would go to trainings on how to de-escalate a person who's having a manic episode, how to de-escalate or connect with a student or a person who is experiencing an autistic episode. And overwhelmingly, there would be 3 or 4, maybe out of 40 people, 3 or 4 community members like myself, and then the rest of the room would be police officers. And so the question that I want to start with you, Chief Hardwick, is, in your opinion, do you think that law enforcement are being asked to do too much for society?
Dr. Miles, that's a difficult answer, difficult question to answer because, we have become the catch-alls, but with a little bit of pride too as well, and Dr. Beal, you mentioned something, I'm in this profession for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I'm in this profession for 28 years is because you never deal with the same thing twice. You may get the same type of call, but you never deal with the same thing twice. And this profession, as with any profession, you have to be, it's flexible and fluid and ever changing. The police academy, I will tell you this, there's some flaws in the system when we talk about this. The police academy is 700 hours long, approximately. And beautician school, I think, is over 1,000 hours long. So, there's a little bit of, and I'm saying that facetiously because maybe it's something that, it's been this way for a long time, the training amount, but the book does nothing for us. On-the-job training of law enforcement is truly where we get our experiences. And, here, I'm truly blessed to work in a community where I grew up, where I was raised my entire life, where I went to school, where I went to college, where I met my wife. I'm one of the few, though. So with that being said, again, on one hand, I want to tell you that we never want to turn a call down for service. I am proud to say that our jail population is continuing to decrease here in St. Johns County. Our average population now is just over 400. Karen knows I'm very passionate about this. Something I'm going to bite off when we actually take over the sheriff's office is our reentry program. And we want people to leave the jail and be successful in our community. And I talk about that simply because when you say, are we kind of overtaxed for our job? I don't know, because with that, I want to be able to provide every services and every means for people to be successful in society. And with that being said, you don't want to turn down anybody. We're customer service based, just like any other customer service. We're customer service based, and we got to provide all the products per se to our community to make them successful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and just kind of tag on what you've said, Chief. And I don't want to sound smug or sarcastic when I basically look at 3 different agencies, the beach police, the city police, and the sheriff's department, with some overlapping jurisdictions, and really ask questions that obviously Chief Hardwick has been living for a long, long time. And that is, what exactly are these departments being asked to do for society, and then extend it beyond our county into the rest of the state and the world? And what exactly are they not being asked to do? And then when and where? And when we look at the situation in terms of what it is that they're doing, and they're doing extremely well in many, many areas. And I have contact with all three departments. Part of it is that as soon as something flares up nationally, everybody wants to have an answer to what should be done in the community instead of living those questions and living them in a way where people can come together to better understand and get answers, as opposed to just, in a sense, taking some of the pot shots, if you will, that have been sent out there around the country about this is what we should do as knee-jerk reactions to things.
Spiros or Dr. Bill, do you want to respond to this question, or should I move on? You'll have plenty of time.
I'll let Spiros go first if you'd like to, and then because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to talk.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. So yeah, I agree with Chief Hardwick about law enforcement becoming a catch-all. So in my opinion, yes, they are asked to do too much oftentimes. For years, they've been expected to be this point of contact for dealing with vulnerable populations, especially. So the homeless, mentally ill, sexual assault survivors, juvenile delinquents, so on and so forth. And all of these groups, they require a very specific level of expertise and sensitivity to truly help. And so at the same time that we've got people calling 911 to handle these intense high-risk situations, we have a vocal subset of the population that is upset with how some LEOs do treat these groups, because they recognize that police shouldn't be the only or even primary agents interacting with them in the first place. There are a lot of situations in which social workers should be responding. So you've got a group of people we've labeled as keepers of the peace that we expect to protect and serve, and they're being given, I don't know if the term should be mixed signals from the population for what they're expected to do and how to do it. But that's not to say that it's the fault of the community for needing LEOs, and at the same time being outraged over mistreatment or mishandling of people in situations that has been a problem throughout the history of law enforcement, but especially in the spotlight now. People don't really have anyone else to go to when emergencies arise. Even if there's a group of emergency response social workers that exists in one city across the country, it's not some national organization that exists as prevalently as the police, nor should I say is it funded as heavily.
Can I add something to that, Doctor? Are we allowed to do that? You know, one thing I got to say, Mr. Spears, and I appreciate you saying something, about that. It's one thing to read something in a book, and it's one thing to put that book practice to action. And with that being said, and let's just talk about an autistic kid. And I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with autism, but it's something my wife and I are very passionate about. And I won't get into that right now, but there's a difference between just with one kid being on the spectrum of autism does not mean they're all the same. Just like we as all humans, there's different, degrees on the spectrum per se. So here we check the box and we do the 40-hour course for the autism awareness class. That does nothing for us until you actually, when we bring the special needs kids here from the schools, I do it for two reasons. I do it because my men and women can see that there's 25 kids that are different in so many different ways. There's a young man I'll describe you right now. His name is Wes, and he came here. He's bigger than me. He's 220 pounds. He looks like a grown man. He's in middle school, and he has zero. He's autistic, and he has no communication skills at all. He does not speak. My wife, as a nurse, blows bubbles to get his attention and to get him to follow her around. When you deal with a young man like that on the side of the road, we have no clue what that means to us. Yes, we might have read it in a book. Yes, we might have met him one time, but we don't understand it. There's so much more to this picture. And again, Mr. Spears, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's just, we have a lot to learn, by the way. We have a lot of flaws in our profession, and we are not going to master this skill, not my life and time, and probably not Mr. Spiros. So again, thank you. And I apologize to butt in.
Dr. Bill, you have anything to add?
Not really. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Great. So kind of along these same lines, and Spiros, I'll actually start with you, since you initiated this conversation about the law enforcement being asked to do too much. So in the sense of, from in the perspective of defunding the police, in the sense that law enforcement may be being asked to do too much, what first responders do you think are the most appropriate to handle certain issues in a practical, like what would be a practical solution? For example, if someone's Baker acted, calling in a mental health professional, or in the example that Chief Hartwick gave with approaching someone who is autistic, that one could be questionable because the onlooker who's calling the police may not realize that the person is autistic. They may just be calling in that there's someone behaving strangely. So who do you think, in your professional opinion, as a criminology student, who do you think would be the most appropriate first step?
I believe that social workers would, be best equipped, especially if they've already had like that experience with these groups. And I might be like reaching off for like some far off ideal here, but I think it would be amazing to have officers that are trained in that as well. So it's not just a social worker or just an officer, it's an officer that is studied, something like that. That's what I'm trying to do myself, is pursue that Master's of Social Work after I graduate from Flagler. Because I think it is like as was touched on before, like a multifaceted issue that can be handled. I do think that reallocating funds to restructure departments in such a manner shouldn't even really be a question to facilitate that. If there's one thing I do remember from my comparative government class with Dr. Cremona and poli-sci, it's that we as a society practically deify the concept of efficiency. So I think it shouldn't come as surprising that we should be structuring such a key part of our society in as efficient of a manner as we can, that focuses on having the right people assigned to do specific tasks. Specializations already exist in policing, from K9 units to SRT and SWAT. And teams like special victims units exist, but they're not in every single department due to whatever limitations exist in a particular location. And they're also not the same as dedicated social workers.
Great points. Does anyone want to follow up?
I think that what I'm hearing really agrees with where we come from on a lot of issues, that you're talking about a both and as opposed to an either or. And sometimes that both and is the same person. A good example would be that the St. Augustine Police Department has 2 officers who are intensely dedicated to working with the homeless. And they really went through a huge learning curve to get where they are, because there are only 2 departments in the whole state that have dedicated people like that working with the homeless population within cities that have the problems that St. Augustine does. And so having gone through that learning curve, they've also, with the chief, created all these partnerships that directly relate to the homeless. So they have the skill on the street, because they're working that as their beat all the time, to have the training now to know exactly where to be taking the person or how to directly help the person. And I believe that's the both and that you're referring to. That if you have people who have social work training, and they may not have their master's degree and license, but they've had the correct training with it, then they can then, within the department, become its own specialist within, who also knows what the limitations that they have are, but they can be that first responder. And I think that's what's so important. I've been there when boys at the youth academy have been bakered, and it's not a pretty sight at all. And it's difficult. So to expect to wait for somebody professional to come is just really not an option. But to have people like you're suggesting, Kobe, and others, to have the training needed to take it to a certain point so there can be a successful resolution is really a beautiful thing in terms of both end kind of response.
I'm just going to just say a couple things. And again, there's nothing I don't agree with you. I agree with the both of you. In a perfect world, of course, we would be social workers, you know, because I would say, I'm just guessing probably 70% of our job really probably is social worker reference type of things. However, you know, we never know, you know, last year, the 3 agencies, we handled about 250,000 calls for service here in St. Johns County with a population of about the same number, about 250,000 people, not including our visitors. So, you know, for me, it's one of those things, again, it's like you said something, Mr. Spears, in the beginning of your conversation where you talked about war on drugs. So we adjusted the fire of law enforcement and we're battling drugs in the 80s and 90s. Then we got a mental health crisis in 2000. Now we switched the pendulum the other way. Now we're dealing with mental health crisis. And again, we always, just this year alone, you know, we dealt with COVID-19, civil unrest, and now we're in hurricane season. You know, we're wearing these multiple hats, and I think we do a decent job in this county. Can we do better? Absolutely. But a perfect world, of course, is we are that social worker. I am proud to tell you that, you know, our Baker Acts here in St. Johns County is high. That's a good thing. That means we're looking for an alternate service, because when I started this profession in the historic city downtown where you go to college, the only answer we had was the jail. If you were intoxicated, if you were high, if you were abusing drugs, you abused your wife, you went to the county jail. We've come a long way since then. Now we found other alternative sources to service our population and visitors, and you said it. And a lot of that is probably social work related. Now what's happening, as we know, there's only so much of that services provided here in St. Johns County. So now what do we do with this population that we've said, you're not going to jail, we're going to find you the services, but oh yeah, by the way, the beds are full at Epic in the recovery center, the psychological services in Flagler College or Flagler Hospital, Flagler Health Plus have nothing left. So again, it's one of those things, a perfect world. We've become social workers by fault. And we try to train our men and women as much as we can, but we are getting tested on the street, shooting innocent people that are requiring services because we're not prepared for everything we're dealing with now. There's no textbook answer on this, by the way. Thank you. Sorry.
Dr. Field?
Chief Hardwick did say some of the stuff I was going to say. I think that, and kind of tying this back into my kind of, I guess, opening statement on community-oriented policing, is where I think that the help with organizations, I know that Jenny Thousand, a good friend of mine, is here from Betty Griffin Center, and they do a lot of really good work with the community, and they work closely with law enforcement on kind of a victim advocacy side of things. I think that one of the difficult kind of aspects in trying to handle all this is that we are asking law enforcement to be social workers while also asking them to enforce traffic stops, while also asking them to be at our schools, while also asking them to do a lot of things. And in shifting state money around to try and help address those issues, I think what that's going to end up doing is causing probably less training, less officers that are exposed to these situations where they would get the kind of on-the-job training that Chief Hardwick is talking about. And I mean, not to make this an overly sports analogy, but I don't know how many people watch BYU versus Navy at the first week of college football, but Navy admittedly practiced with all social distancing in mind, didn't tackle it all at practice, and lost 55-3 because once the game started, they forgot how to tackle. And so if we shift, I think, too much money away from law enforcement and shift too much of the resources and training that they need, if you don't practice how you play, you don't play how you practice. I mean, you end up playing how you practice, right? And so there's some kind of, I guess, that's kind of where the kind of crux of the debate is how much training is too much training, and is there ever enough training? Because that also is kind of a low-hanging fruit in budgetary constraints to cut or fund more.
Dr. Miles, can I make a comment on the defunding word?
Sure.
You know, I think we talk about this defunding word, and someone said in the very beginning of this, you know, when we first heard this word, I'm like, wow, you want to shut down the police departments? That's not what was meant. I think that was how we twist things in this perfect world we live in America. But one thing I want to say about that, a couple things I want to say about that. First of all, you know, if you've never been to a lawless society, I have. I've been to Haiti, and I've been overseas in combat zones where they are lawless. And where the government doesn't have policing because they can't afford it, or it's so corrupt it does its own thing. I don't think that's what they're talking about here in America. And I think, what we're talking about is defunding, meaning let's take some of these resources we have, the monies that are allocated by our taxpayers, and take it, put it towards program, like Mr. Spiro said earlier, which I agree with. And we're already doing that to some extent. Can we do better? Probably, we always can, but I think, Dr. Beal can contest to this, that, we do give a lot of services to Betty Griffin House, which is a not-for-profit, a 501c3. However, they become the catch-all services. So again, defunding the police department is taking the funds that are allocated to us and taking them and putting them somewhere else. I'm in favor of that. And, if it's social workers in our agencies and mental health professionals in our agencies that help offset our calls for services and make us respond better, I'm all about that. I'm probably one of the only agencies in the state of Florida that has 2 volunteer clinical psychologists here, Dr. Tracy Hedgemanowski and Colonel Ann Johnson, that work with this agency to make sure my men and women are mentally physically fit. Because if we're not mentally physically fit, we can't respond to a call for service. So again, I just wanted to bring that up. But I think defunding has been, certain people of society have said, defund them, shut them down. That's not what they're saying, I don't think. I think what they're saying is just like, Kobe said, was taking the money, reallocating into other sources and making it better.
All right, and that's actually a perfect segue. So besides the misunderstandings related to the terminology, what concerns would any of you have with this concept of defunding the police?
Don't let me go first on this one. I'll be the cleanup batter on this one.
Well, or maybe I should ask, are there any concerns? Based on your level of understanding of what the movement is recommending, does anyone see any concerns with defunding the police movement? Not literally defunding the police, but what the movement is about.
Again, I'm going to speak up then. If everybody's going to be quiet, I'm going to speak up because, again, I'm just going to reiterate what I just said. If we can take and allocate resources and funds, and by the way, this doesn't just include responding to calls for service. And this is where Karen ties in, into this conversation with the reentry program and, helping these men and women. By the way, so let me tell you what happens when a person gets out of prison, which let's say they do 10 years of prison time. They get a free bus ticket to their city of choice in the state of Florida. And then they get a little bit of spending money, and they get 5 days of prescription narcotics if they're on a prescription pill while they're in prison. And then they have to report to the local sheriff's office, one of the 67 counties, within a certain amount of time. And that's their way to reintegrate back into our society. Don't we want them to come back and be members of our society? So if you were to tell me, Rob Harwick, hey, take 5% of one of your line items, and we want you to go ahead and help out Karen Goldman with her program of Compassionate St. Augustine, where we help men and women reintegrate back into society, I'm going to say sold. Because if that's the way I can do to reduce crime and help a person get back on their feet in my society where I live, work, and play and raise my family, then I'm all in. But when again, and Dr. Miles, I'm glad you clarified the word defunding. You're right. Reallocating money, I'm all in. And if Kobe comes up with an idea, or Karen or Dr. Beal, we want to work to this together on a community partnership, maybe a private partnership or a private joint partnership with our taxpaying dollars, I'm all in to make our community better.
I'd like to tag on to that, if it's not premature, Chief, but Compassionate St. Augustine has been involved with a national and international program called Alternatives to Violence program. And this is hugely successful in 40 states and in 50 countries in terms of teaching alternatives to violence and peaceful conflict resolution to inmates. And it was so successful when it got started in the 1970s, it then spread into some communities and whatnot. And right now, we're in conversation with Chief Hardwick and Chief Fox, and what we're going to be doing is bringing alternatives to violence to the police departments. And because Chief Hardwick is going on to the sheriff's department as well, to do this particular training. Now, what's important about this in terms of tying into what we're talking about in terms of reallocation of funds and everything else, we see ourselves as a community partner with law enforcement in our community. And so we are literally going to be bringing the first round of this program to the group that they're going to put together to go through this. This is very intensive training. It's 3 weekends. Each weekend it's 18 to 22 hours. It goes basic, advanced, and then the last piece trains facilitators within the departments to be able then to work with the department and also with new recruits. And I believe it's these partnerships and putting together more of these partnerships that bring funding, but also then see the viability of the department itself extending that funding into an area when it's been successful. And once again, I think it's a both and kind of solution. Defunding doesn't make sense to me as a word, but all of the other words that can be applied to it, especially reallocation of some of the funds, certainly does.
Okay, so in considering time, for the next segments, I'm only going to ask for one response for the questions. And so just, be prepared and don't yell at me if you really wanted to answer a question. But first, Dr. Beal, if you could give a very quick overview in the same way that you gave an overview of the Defund the Police movement, can you give a quick overview of the idea around the militarization of police?
Sure. So this is another unfortunate, I think, phrase that we're using because obviously, and Chief Hardwick can touch on this in his one response that he should have, but as a former military member, but the basic idea is that the weaponry of law enforcement has become seemingly too sophisticated for what they need to enforce the laws in our society. Opponents of this, again, on a spectrum, could range all the way from we should not have armed law enforcement in America, and they'll cite a bunch of developed countries that don't use armed law enforcement, to some people that say, well, armed law enforcement is okay in certain situations, or certain aspects of training of law enforcement can have these certain type of weaponry. Some of these are a little intellectually, we tend to, I think, kind of forget our history a little bit. The kind of intellectual history of this has kind of started in even the 20s and 30s when the mob was really running things. They had weaponry. The police were getting outgunned during the war on drugs. In particular, drug cartels ended up, police all had revolvers, drug cartels had semi-automatic weaponry, and police were finding themselves outgunned. And so the police, in terms of militarization, kind of seem to be upgrading their weaponry as it responds to what the criminals have. But again, there's this kind of range of beliefs from completely disarming law enforcement all the way up to they really should have at least the equivalent amount of firepower as the people that they're trying to police in some capacity.
Okay, so with that in mind, a lot of the idea that police militarization have happened over time and was initially a legitimate response to things that were happening in the communities. But now there is a perspective that this militarization is causing a lot of use of force issues specific to communities of color. So whoever wants to answer can just jump right in there. But what are your thoughts on whether or not the militarization of police, as it has evolved today, is creating use of force issues specifically in communities of color?
I don't want to be the mic hog here, so I'm going to give Kobe or Karen and Dr. Beal, please, because these topics are about my profession.
Yeah, you're the expert.
Our profession. So please, everybody else answer, because I can speak on everyone all night long. I'm passionate like all of you are on this, but I've lived this career for 28 years. So please, everybody else, please, if you want to respond, please.
Well, I think on a question like this, a lot of the community is really interested in the law enforcement perspective. So I think, go ahead, answer the question.
So, and again, Dr. Beal, thank you for actually starting it off with, again, we're so good at taking these words and twisting them how we want to hear them, and, militarization. So I am a military guy, 25 years and retired, and we don't need to go into that. with this, I just want to give you one incident that I dealt with, here, I don't know, 3 years ago, right here in St. Augustine Beach. Responded to a simple domestic, I say simple, a simple domestic violence call where the man was intoxicated. The female half called in and wanted him removed from the house because he was disorderly. I responded there with another, a deputy sheriff actually was there with me, some of my beach police officers, and the gentleman inside ended up firing at us multiple times with what they call, it's an M1 Grand rifle, which is a very high caliber rifle. We don't even carry this high power rifle in any of our law enforcement agencies that I know of. But he fired an M1 Grand rifle at us, and multiple times. We were outside the house. We did not knock on the door. This wasn't a search warrant. This was a call for service of his other half. And we returned fire and actually ultimately ended up dying during the exchange of gunfire, again, right here in our jurisdiction in St. Augustine Beach. And the reason why I bring that up is this. If we're not properly prepared, first of all, we got to have men and women that want to do this profession. And Kobe knows this from living, his father's been a police officer or was a police officer, or is a police officer. And I'm sorry I didn't catch it. I apologize. But anyways, with that being said, he's lived this life. And we want our men and women to go home. And we also want men and women that want to do this profession. And with that being said, I do not believe that we are overpowered. Our men and women actually carry the same rifles that are carried by the U.S. military. And you're right. In the combat, this was a combat zone during the war on drugs. Well, I'll tell you this. There's parts of America right now that continue to be a combat zone per se. And I say that just simply because because it's not the fighting on police that's going on. It's the war between the inner rivals of drug gangs in bigger cities. Inner cities. It's been going on for years. It continues to go on. It goes on with the cartels from Mexico, from the Russian cartels. We have, places in America right here in our backyard somewhere that are armed way more than our U.S. military that are fighting overseas. So, I think it's not that it's the militarization, but it's properly using and training and when to use this equipment is the big thing. And so back to real quick, Dr. Miles, to your use of force in communities. The use of force in communities is not just because of the weaponry we carry. It's because of the people that don't know how to do this job. And unfortunately, with any profession, we got to weed the men and women out that shouldn't be doing this profession. And we catch some of it in polygraphs and psychologicals, but that's some that go underneath the radar and do this profession for the wrong reasons. They're scared of their own shadows. And, I'm a person that 28 years of law enforcement, and I've never shot and killed anybody, knock on wood. And my goal is to leave this profession without doing that. And I use my mouth to talk my way out of it, out of circumstances, and de-escalate with my mouth. I never carried a taser. I don't carry a taser to this day. I use my mouth. And again, we have to go back to a little bit of basic policing, but sometimes we have to fight power with power. And we can't be on the losing end of a stick when you go to someone's house and there's a person in the house that's killing kids. I've been in those scenes where people have been killed, innocent people have been killed. I worked a case down in Daytona where there were 6 people murdered by one man over an Xbox machine. And you can Google the case out of Daytona or Deltona. The case was the Xbox case. So again, sometimes we have to be prepared for the worst situation and circumstance. And that's just the way this profession actually goes.
Okay. So I'm gonna, again, looking at time, want to continue moving forward. And Dr. Beal, this will be the last time I ask you to give, a brief overview on a topic from your perspective, from your academic perspective. Could you please give just a really quick overview of the debate on body cams, and then I'll ask the question of the panel, and anyone on the panel can answer, and then I'll move into the Q&A box from our audience.
And ironically, there's all of these things tie together because it really all does come down to money with a lot of this, right? So the body camera debate seems to be the two sides of this kind of argument seem to be one side, which is very, very clear, is if there's more camera footage, we can hold police accountable, we can hold offenders accountable, we can hold everybody at the scene accountable because we have footage of what actually happened. It will keep law enforcement from planting guns on people, drugs on people, any of the kind of illegal behavior we've seen in law enforcement. Having kind of Big Brother watching will deter any of that kind of behavior. The flip side of that, well, and I guess I don't even want to say the flip side of that. There are, of course, debates about when cameras get turned on and off. Are the cameras being used in ways that are intentionally vague? But the kind of flip side of the argument is, number one, cameras are expensive. There's no question about that. All of this technology costs money. And I think that's part of the militarization problem, is the federal government was pouring a bunch of money into police departments to allow them to get this advanced weaponry. So body cameras are expensive. And also, kind of like, again, to use a sports analogy, whenever new leagues decide they want to use playback cameras or instant replay, it allows us 30, 45 minutes, an hour, a couple days, a couple weeks to focus on a decision that was made at the spur of the moment within seconds. And so some argue that the body camera footage, there's some privacy issues that people have with it also, especially for victims, but that body camera footage will be overanalyzed when someone had a split-second decision to make something. So one is to hold people accountable, and one is that it doesn't actually hold anyone accountable because decisions are made too quickly. And also the body camera footage tends to, on the one side, people will say it tends to help incriminate police if they do something bad, but when the footage is shown to corroborate the police's story, the public doesn't always care what the footage says.
Okay. So, Spiros, I think I'll actually direct this question to you. I think you've spoken the least tonight, and you've been very insightful when you have shared. So from your perspective, there have been a lot of situations where a story will hit the news because of cell phone footage, because someone who was standing by decided to record an interaction, and then the lay person who's watching the cell phone footage believes that the interaction was inherently racist. Whether or not they were correct, that was their perception. And so my question for you is, do you think that the use of body cams would help to reduce the number of interactions that are perceived to be racist in the public?
It's funny that you direct that towards me, because I was going to jump in on that one. But I would like to think that everyone in general is more careful when they know that they're being recorded. But if you go on YouTube and you watch some crazy videos, you can see that not everyone cares about that at all. I watched a video the other night of a woman who was kicking and punching some people that were just hanging out in the park. And they were clearly recording her antics and even told her that they were doing so. Told her that they had called the police and they were on their way, yet she continued to be aggressive and outright rude because she thought that she was in the right. It might not have been a factor in this situation, but the people that she was being aggressive towards were people of color. But the point is that cameras aren't themselves going to solve racism. It might compel those officers to hide it, or those people to hide it, but to solve it will require a greater societal effort to recognize how wrong and immoral it truly is.
Thank you. So again, I actually was so enjoying the conversation that we had. I didn't realize that the time was just ticking away. So we have a lot of questions in the chat box. I will ask a couple of them if you need to, for our audience, if you need to go, we understand. But if you want to stick around for a few extra minutes, I will ask a few of these questions. So this first question that I'm going to ask from the chat box, anyone who wants to respond on our panel, please do. The question is essentially, policing has become politicized. Like, people have decided they need to take a stand. Either you're for the police or you're against the police. And those stands have become left or right. And so how do we navigate, this is the question, how do we navigate addressing implicit bias and systemic issues around race as it relates to the police without being characterized as succumbing to a left or far left political agenda? How do we just address the issues without getting bogged down in the, well, you must be supporting this candidate or that candidate?
I can talk on everything. Dr. Beal?
I could talk on things I don't even know about, so I could too.
Well, I want you to talk.
Well, I'll just give like a 30-second spiel. Maybe let everybody just kind of give like maybe a 10-second thing. But anyways, would that be, I hate the fact that it's either you like the police or don't. I don't see that here in St. Johns County. Is it going on? Sure. But I don't think we have quite the problems the rest of the nation does. And I'm pretty involved in this community. Like I said, I coach middle school football. to pretty much I'll call it a Southern St. Johns County school, which doesn't have as much money as the Northern schools do. But with that being said, I hate the fact that we have done that. But I think our men and women, by the way, during the civil unrest, our calls for service did not stop. People did not, I want everybody to know that's listening to this and watching this, that with this civil unrest started, with all these cases that went on in America, our calls for service here in St. Johns County did not stop. People did not stop calling the police. Every race, creed, color, religion, sexual orientation did not stop calling the police. So once again, I don't want to blame the media, but the media puts the twist on it, what makes the news on the TV in my office. People aren't going to watch the news in my office or in their house if it's too happy, too go lucky. So again, I just wanted to give a quick 10-second on that. I'm sure Dr. Beal has some academic stuff he can say on that, but I just wanted to just say that, and I'll let you guys answer too as well.
I think that seemingly, empirically at least, the best way to stop really any sort of racism or bias is exposure to people of that group. Right? We oftentimes can demonize or villainize people that we don't hang out with, we don't interact with, we're not exposed to on a regular basis because they're them and we don't have to interact with them, right? And so community-oriented policing, which is, I guess, kind of how I started this thing off, is one way, having police officers in those communities, not for a law enforcement function, but for community service functions, interacting with different communities would cause a better trust and better working relationship with law enforcement and the communities, right? It would encourage both people to be more trusting and have stronger opinions. There also, in general, should be some sort of kind of cross-cultural training in some capacity and understanding, right? If you were raised in the Deep South and you grew up hearing about slave patrols, you might have different opinions of law enforcement, and the law enforcement should know that going into that. They're not looking at you like your family may have talked about law enforcement. And so cross-cultural competency in some capacity, and also just general kind of exposure to each other would help, empirically at least, does help increase trust between the community and law enforcement.
So this is another kind of lead into a question that's here from one of our audience members. As I said earlier, I used to be involved in training of police department and when I lived in Indiana. And those trainings were specific to training on diversity and inclusion, bias, etc. And we spent essentially years working with this one specific police department where we would do trainings over a period of 6 weeks. And we actually got the police chief at the time to agree to make going through our diversity training a requirement for advancement within the police department. And so one of the questions here, and the fact is, every police department is not created equal. You do have some of these really terrible things that we see on the news, and they're happening and they're real, but they may not be real for the community that we live in. So the question is, what kind of training specific to diversity, racism, self-analysis, etc., are our law enforcement officers participating in? And of course, Chief Hardwick, you are the chief of one police department, but you can talk about any trainings that may be happening. But if anyone else is aware of trainings that are happening in the community, feel free to jump in.
Sure. So, a quick answer to this question is, first of all, let's take out COVID-19 because our training lives have really gone upside down. So let's just talk about kind of pre-COVID-19 and where we're going in the future, because we will get back to normal, especially in our profession. We got no choice. So with that, there's so many of these. What I don't like is this. I'm just going to be straight honest with you, is that, we have these check in the boxes classes we have to take every 4 years. It's a ridiculous cultural diversity class that we take online. We go through this PowerPoint. We go through as quick as we can, as quick as the PowerPoint would let us check on it, because I know the answers on the quiz in the end that we have to take, because it's a little bit common sense. It taught me nothing. It really has not taught me nothing. All it's done is help out with my time management. So we can definitely improve on these. See, me, it's on the job training. It's me coaching at a middle school football program where a majority of my kids are African-American and Hispanic, and their parents are the same. That's where I get mine. And, so we're always taking these classes again and trying to send our men and women to these classes. But how do you really teach until you get involved in the community? Until you have an African-American police officer like Officer Preston, who worked for me, that, came here and enlightened us on a few things of being a Black female, being a Black educated female in this profession. So with that being said, again, we take these classes throughout the year on cultural diversity. I'm actually a cultural diversity instructor, but really for me, the cultural diversity instruction is in the field and talking to the people and getting out and getting involved in your communities.
Okay, well, I'll call you later. I'll talk to you about some other options.
Please.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or what they may be aware of that might be happening in some of the other community police departments?
I'll go back to the program that we're offering. And thanks to COVID, we're not going to get started in 2020. It'll have to be 2021. But it's highly experiential. And I think that's the counterpoint, if you will, counterpoint to what Chief Hardwick was just saying about check off the boxes and that type of education, which tends to be pretty didactic for the most part. And this is just the opposite, which is why we can't get started until 2021. But it is so experiential that all of those things come into play with that are, in a sense, the ideals of being out in the community without necessarily having the cohorts from the community that you need to make that final on-the-job piece of it work in the way that you described. But I think it's that kind of training that ultimately can bring about the transformation that people are hoping for.
Can I say one more thing, Dr. Miles? And I'll stay on this thing all night long, by the way, because I think it's important that these questions get answered and we get a chance to chat with these people. So I'll stay in here till this thing is over with. But if, in a perfect world, if I could take, I started my profession, I worked in the Department of Corrections in prison first, and then worked in a county jail, then went to the road. In a perfect world in law enforcement, if I could make that happen, if every police officer right out of the academy could go straight to our county jail or go right to prison and work, let's just say a year, I can tell you this, because by the way, you're forced to basically live, eat, and sleep and talk to them in order to, you have to communicate effectively in order to make your job work as working in a jail or a prison. And with that being said, you have to talk to every race, creed, color, or sexual orientation in these jails. And it makes you a better person, because some of these men and women are not exposed to anything if they don't go if they just go from life to college to the job. They got no life experience. But that's what's happened. They got no life experience. And the only thing they've dealt with in their life is their own culture. And it could be just sometimes white or just sometimes Black. So again, I just wanted to bring that up. In a perfect world, I wish they could go to jail for a year, literally go to jail for a year and come out and be the better officer.
So we actually have a number of questions in our Q&A box related to all kinds of topics. We have questions about the budget, the specific budget of your police department, Chief Hardwick. We have questions about kind of some of the statistics on the number of people who have been involved in police-involved shootings this year. And we also have questions about, specific questions about this militarization aspect, meaning having actual military equipment, using tear gas at protests, things like that. So I'm just gonna say that these are all topics that our audience is interested in. And if any one of you want to respond to any one of those topics, because we are gonna have to wrap this up soon, and we'll do our best for the audience. Since we couldn't get to all the questions, we'll do our best to compile these questions and try to get some answers and send them out to the attendees. But does anyone want to respond to questions about, the statistics related to police-involved shootings? And I have some numbers here for Florida specifically. So, nationally, there's been over 700 police-involved shootings that ended in death. But in the state of Florida, the number is more around, I think I wrote down 373. So anyone want to talk about how we get to a place where we build trust in the community when certain communities are afraid of the police, or anything else I mentioned? Somebody,
I can talk. First of all, for our listeners out there and our viewers, that these statistics are actually kept by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So they're so easy. I hate to use the word Google, but to be cliche, but it's easy to Google these stats and go to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And we actually also report these stats every year to the twice a year to the FBI. So if you go to the either one of those actually agencies, you get the specific stats for agency, county, state, all the above, as Dr. Miles said, because I know we can talk about this forever. So sorry about that, Dr. Miles.
No, it's fine. But what are your thoughts on it? If they're a community, because then we are specifically talking about social justice, communities of color. There are a lot of statistics that show that specifically the African-American population seems to be over-policed. And so when you talk about police-involved shootings, if a population represents, like in the state of Florida, the Black population is 16%, but they are about 48% of police-involved shootings resulting in death. How do we inspire confidence? We're having a great conversation today, and I think a lot of questions have been answered, and there's been a lot of dialogue and no yelling or frustration. But there still does exist some levels of discomfort and fear around interacting with police officers. So how do we inspire confidence when we have some communities that just don't trust it and would rather take their chances with the robber in their neighborhood than call the police?
This is our problem in society. It goes quiet for a while. Floyd and Taylor happen. And then it rears up again. We talk about it just like this, and then we don't do any action, by the way. We don't fix the problem. We put a Band-Aid on it, and it goes away. We get sidetracked in life. That's just how life is in society. And next thing you know, it's a hurricane or it's summer season, whatever it may be. And one thing we don't do, we're not good at, and I say we, because I blame us all in this community. Because we talk about it now. It's a great interaction. We talk about it, and then we go on with life. Life gets too busy. Life's too important, and nothing matters to us because our life is perfect. And then something happens again, and we're back right here again on the same screen talking about the same exact things, and we did nothing to fix the problem. And that's why, I'm looking forward to being the sheriff in St. Johns County, because I can affect change. But what I can't do, I cannot affect change without community partnerships like this right here and people coming to the table. And if I could tell you all the innovative things that I want to do in this community, I could go all night. But one thing is being involved with our faith-based community, being more involved with our children. We finally get a chance because of Parkland to be in these kids' schools now from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. I feel that once these kids get in high school, it's hard to change their minds on what their perception is of law enforcement based on how they were raised or how their mom and dads talk to them or what they've seen. But we have a chance now to mix it. We should not be in the schools just because we had a law enforcement or because we had a mass shooting. We should be in there because we're making a difference in these kids' lives, because we're talking to them about problems. Yeah, they're going to have a hiccup. Yeah, they're going to smoke marijuana. Yeah, they're going to make bad mistakes, but they don't need to go to jail for it. They need to be mentored to how to make them. We've all been there, by the way. We've all got flaws in life. So again, I want to answer every one of these questions, but I see that the Q&A is actually building up more and more, because I wish we could have a face-to-face conversation on this. So I'm open to any questions that they bring to the table, and I'll answer the best I can. However, just you're going to have to give me some time.
That's completely. Go ahead, Dr. Beal.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I also want to say, I think that, and this is even taken from empirical literature on eyewitnesses, on interrogation and confessions, on jury decision-making. I think that one of to answer the more practical aspect of communities not trusting each other, we in general, right, naturally kind of group ourselves with people like us, which is why it's so important to force, and there's not a policy prescription for this necessarily, but try and push ourselves to be around people that are different from us. We tend to be able to detect lies of people in our own race better than we can cross-racially. We tend to be able to identify people of our own race easier than people cross-racially, because we just have more competency with people that are like us. And so by having interactions where we're forcing police officers, and that's Black police officers in white neighborhoods, white police officers in Black neighborhoods, by forcing kind of more integration into society in general, and more interactions in non-law enforcement functions, right, in aspects of community service, we're better able to kind of break down a lot of barriers. Having shared experiences like Chief Hardwick mentioned, where he's coaching a team that is very much a heterogeneous team, that allows us to better view things. Because if I'm a police officer and I think someone's lying to me because I'm not culturally aware of the fact that they're behaving in a certain way, I might treat them differently than if I'm a police officer who thinks someone's being very forthcoming with me, because I can pick up on subtleties in those interactions.
All right, and then go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and from experience. We've been in St. John's Youth Academy for 5 years now, and 72 boys most of the time. The majority come from Duval County, but the rest come from around the state. So these aren't even local boys who are there. They range in age from 13 up to, they have to leave by 21. But for the most part, they're 14 to 18, but that's kind of the spectrum. And for the most part, everybody from Compassionate St. Augustine, who has been going in there to do, we've done over 30 different behavioral enhancement, meaning emotional intelligence and arts programs over that period of time, and built partnerships. So there are students who have come from Flagler College, from Leslie Robeson from the art department, and worked with these kids. It has been a major transformative event, both for the boys, who are all felons, and some of them, it takes some months before they take the hood off their head and give a hug when you can do that. But it's been more transformative for the people from Compassionate St. Augustine who have gone in, and this is the very first time they've had those kinds of interactions with people who represent both a racial and ethnic spectrum. The majority of the boys, 90%, are boys of color. And so it's a true eye-opener, and their lives will never be the same for having had the experiences that they had while incarcerated. And our instructors, I mean, going back year after year to be with those boys, because their lives have been so drastically changed. It's the only way it happens. It is the only way.
I think that's a great example, and I also think we have to do more as a community, and we will wrap up, and I'll give every one of our panelists a chance to give your last words. We have to do more, as everyone has been saying, to make sure that we are intentional in getting to know people who are different from us. It's the only way we're going to make true progress. It's the only way we're going to start to recognize our bias, to recognize our preconceived notions that we have about people. Because, you know, using Karen's last example, I'm sure the experience with Compassionate St. Augustine, or the participants from Compassionate St. Augustine was transformative. But if 90% of the young people involved were people of color, and they are all felons, 90% of the people of color I know are not felons. And so that still creates a very different perception or interaction if when we're interacting with people who are different from us, they are coming from one very specific perspective. And so I will add that my last word is that I do think that we all have a lot of work to do to make sure that we are being intentional in building relationships and getting to know each other as human beings as best we can. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'll ask all of our panelists to give your last words. And I'll start again in the same order I started with at the beginning. So Chief Hartwick, you can go first.
Again, Dr. Miles, Flagler College, thank you for having us tonight. It's truly a privilege as being an alumni talking here as your Chief of Police and now your Sheriff. But I tell you what, this, again, I'm just going to reemphasize, this takes a community partnership. It's so easy to point fingers at, you know, law enforcement and or us pointing fingers at you. And I have to kind of take some words from Dr. Randy Nelson, who's a professor at Bethune-Cookman. You know, we have to take responsibility for each other, you know, for our own actions. And I do take responsibility for our law enforcement officers, you know, that police here in St. Johns County. And we are going to hold them accountable. We are going to have transparency. On the body camera issues, I never got a chance to speak on that, but it's not a matter of if, it's when it's going to happen. Budgets are an excuse. It's just a matter of the timing and making sure everything's the right timing in the right place, I should say. So again, thank you for having me tonight. I challenge all of you that are listening tonight and on the Q&A, we didn't get a chance to get to you, that, hey, be a part of us, get involved. And my last statement of the night is, Kobe, reach out to me. I got a job for you, young man. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Beal.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that to kind of echo what Chief Hardwick said a little while ago, these are good conversations, but conversations without any action behind them are not particularly fruitful, right? And so it does take the community working with law enforcement and law enforcement working with the community. And so we need to keep having conversations, keep interacting with other people that aren't like us, and keep pushing to try and make society better, because society is just made up of a bunch of people. And so we are the ones that have the capacity to change society if we're willing to do our part every day when we're living our lives. And I'll just leave it with that. And Spiros, congratulations on the job.
So I do want to agree with Dr. Beal 100%. And I mean, it's been reiterated multiple times how important community policing is to build those relationships and that trust. I mean, I've learned personally from, this is a bit of a comparison here, but working in residence life, I get into situations where I end up having to document students violating the student code of conduct, but I've almost never had a horrible interaction with them afterward, because we do put so much focus on building that community in our residence halls. And so when we get into these disciplinary situations with these students and they know us and they know that we're only doing our jobs and they appreciate how understanding and compassionate we are, it helps 100% moving through that and, just managing to work effectively. And I do want to say to Chief Hardwick, you will have to compete with the city police, unfortunately. So yeah, sorry about that.
Spiro said he is a wanted man. So start recruiting him now. Send him gifts or something. Karen, you get the last word.
I'd just like to thank you so much for the opportunity. And I haven't heard anything tonight that I didn't agree with. I heard lots that I wanted to expand and jump in and claim my 5 or 6 hours of preaching and teaching and everything. Kobe, I'd like to basically invite you to be one of the community representatives on this first team that we're putting together for alternatives to violence, and have you, if it fits with your schedule, go through this training. And I think I would have Chief Hardwick's support for that. And when we meet tomorrow, I think I'll have Chief Fox's support for that also. And so that just leaves another spot for a community representative, but that one's yours if you want it, and we can talk more about it. Nice. And I think the most important thing that I've heard from where it is that I come from is, yes, let's gather up people who have done nothing but talk about it and get them involved in taking action. As I said at the beginning, we're based on advocacy and action, and that's the only way that training and those conversations can be enlivened. They can't be enlivened by everybody going home. They have to be enlivened by something that's transformative in our community.
Dr. Miles, can I ask you one question before you go?
Of course.
If you don't mind those Q&As that were not answered, if you're okay with this, would you send those via my email, maybe with either a telephone number or an email address? And everybody that's listening, I will reach out to you and contact you. I like phone dialogues better, to be honest with you.
Well, I know I can get you email addresses, but yes, we can get you the questions, and you can respond how you see fit.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I have appreciated this dialogue, and I'm looking forward to the remaining Fearless Conversation series. We do have our next conversation scheduled. Let me get on my website here for October 22nd. And the conversation, the title of that conversation is Racism in the U.S. Education System. And we will be joined by Dr. Edwidge Bryant, who is Associate Professor of Education here at Flagler College, and Ms. Cynthia Williams, who is the Senior Director for Innovation and Equity for St. Johns County Schools. So thank you so much to the panel, and thank you to the audience, especially those of you who stayed for the long haul, as we're almost 30 minutes over, but this has been an incredible conversation. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.